I mean, work is such a big part of our lives, and sometimes it can be a big drain on people's lives, right? That can have a negative impact on their ability to live a full and interesting and energetic life. And I'm all about helping people to expand that overlap between professional success and personal happiness. I mean,
Right.
what good is success if you're not enjoying it?
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. I'm Audley Stevenson, and we're back for another edition of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I appreciate you for being here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping listeners live their best audacious lives ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay connected to all good things audacious related. Now, on this episode, I've got Terry McDougall joining me on the Audacious Living Podcast. And Terry is a career coach, a speaker, and author who works with individuals to help them find happiness and success in their careers. Now, when you think about how much of our time is dedicated to the work we do and how much time we spend there and the people we spend it with, it only makes sense that we're doing something that brings us happiness and satisfaction and doesn't rob us of our energy or bring us down. It may be called work, but it doesn't mean that it actually has to be hard. One of the things that Terry encourages clients to do is treat work like a game, because if it's a game, it's easier for us to remove ourselves from it personally. And when we remove ourselves personally from a situation, we first off have a lot more fun. The decision-making process is clear. Our perspective is not clouded, and we're able to plan and strategize much better. Terry was great to talk to, and I really think that she had great insights that you'll all appreciate. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Terry McDougall. Enjoy. Terry, it's a pleasure to have you here with me today on the Audacious Living Podcast. Thanks for being here, man.
Oh, Oddly, thank you for having me. I love the name of your podcast, Audacious Living. Like, who doesn't want that, man? It's cool. It's great to be here.
It sort of happened by accident, but it was a happy happenstance, if you will. But it makes sense. It sort of gives you, at least for me, it really frames, okay, this is how I want to live my life. And so,
yeah.
I think that's a great approach. And I think it also fits very well for the topic that we'll get into in terms of how we live our lives, but in the professional setting and as a career coach and helping people sort of get on track with that. I think that makes a lot of sense, because you're doing it a bit of boldness, kind of go out there and do what you got to do for yourself, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, work is such a big part of our lives, and sometimes it can be a big drain on people's lives, right? That can have a negative impact on their ability to live a full and interesting and energetic life. And I'm all about helping people to expand that overlap between professional success and personal happiness. I mean,
Right.
what good is success if you're not enjoying it?
Well, yeah. Well, and I think oftentimes it's forgotten about that personal happiness because you're so ingrained on, I gotta grind, I gotta keep going.
Yeah.
And there's an aspect of this where you still have to be satisfied and rewarded at the same time. Like you can have both, is really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I firmly believe that you can have both, and I actually think that if you if you really value yourself and you believe that it's possible to kind of be in flow, and have happiness and success, that you're actually going to be more successful,
Mm,
because there's a lot of energy that gets wasted when you're in the grind,
yes,
right?
yes.
That's it. Just
Yep.
you can just tell, right? Like grind. Just that whole thought is like, there's a lot of friction and
Right.
tension,
Right.
and it takes a lot of energy to be there. And when we're in the flow, a lot of times, things come to us a lot more easily. We can be working in our zone of genius, and it just is, it feels better. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, I think that sometimes we've been conditioned to believe
Yep.
that work has to be hard, and
That's
it
right.
doesn't.
That's
It
right.
doesn't.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was going to say how fascinating that belief is that it's out there that this is what you got to do, and maybe it was those before us because they went through it, so that's how they felt that we have to go
Hmm.
through it too, or the next generation. But
Yeah.
no, it doesn't have to be. I think there's actually, if I recall correctly, on your website, there's a line you say, "Enjoy yourself along the way," and you can.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you'll have more energy to
Ah, good point.
to come up with those brilliant new ideas, or to connect, or to do whatever it is that you do. Because too often, I think that people have those Sunday night or Monday morning
Yes.
dreads, right, where they're
Yes.
like, ugh, I have to go to work, I just don't have the energy to do it, right? And that's just kind of miserable,
Right.
right? And,
Right.
and it can, if we can shift our mindset and learn some skills so that we're a lot more in the flow and we're excited about getting up and going to work, it's a whole different experience.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And what it does for other people when you talk about energy, I think what's really important when you have the energy conversation, not only what you do for yourself, but how you impact those around you. Like that's another big
It has a
aspect.
huge ripple effect. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So Terry, let's go back just a little bit and talk about what got you where you are now. I mean, everyone has gotten their own life path, their own journey, and I'm assuming
Yeah.
that you had yours to get to this point.
Yeah. Let's see, how far back do I go? I'm a first generation college graduate. My parents got married very, very young. And, my dad was a high school graduate. My mom actually had me when she was a teenager. She actually had to drop out of high school to
Hmm.
become a mom and wife.
Hmm.
And but luckily for me, both my parents were really focused on me and my sisters getting college educations. But I was the first, I'm the oldest, first one to get a college degree, and I
Hmm.
really set my sights on wanting to work in the corporate world.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that when you're first generation, there's not really anybody to guide you, to give you the rules of the road, or show you like, this is what you do and this is how it's different from maybe your hourly job that you worked in college, or different than school. And
Right.
so when I was a very good student, and when I got into the workplace, I just kind of assumed that I'd have the same kind of success in the workplace that I had at school. And I quickly discovered that no, it's a different world. There are different rules, and I did not know the rules. It took me a while to even figure this out, right? I just was frustrated because I wasn't moving up, but I became, a bit of a student, really paying attention to like, okay, what's the dynamic here? What's going on? How is that person getting ahead? And, I think that over time, I learned some of the unwritten rules of the workplace, but I still wasn't really advancing the way that I wanted to.
Right.
And I was lucky enough along the way to have some good mentors. And one mentor in particular, I think really, I think of him as pulling back the veil and starting to point out to me the dynamics of what was going on around me in the workplace. And that was a huge eye opener, and actually had me approaching work in a very different way. And after, working with him, and then actually I hired a coach at one point that helped me to get a new job where I basically doubled my salary within the first year
Hmm.
of starting that job. Um, so I started enjoying the success that I had longed for. And that job that I was in that for 12 years. And one of the things that I always got a lot of satisfaction out of, and I can't say that part of it isn't self-serving, but I loved it anyway, is
Hmm.
coaching and mentoring
Right.
people on my team. To
Right.
me, I just thought this is just a win-win-win, right? It's a win for these people because I'm teaching them, I'm training them, I'm giving them the benefit of my knowledge so that
Hmm.
they can be more successful. as me as a team leader, when you've got smart, hardworking people who are motivated and like their jobs and feel like there's
Yeah.
growth and they're
What a place to
trusted,
be.
it's fantastic, right? Like it just makes me look brilliant when they're doing such a great
Right.
job. And then of course it was good for the company because we were retaining these folks and that, they were engaged and so forth. Um, but I did that for a long time. I was at my last job for 12 years, and I'd say about 10 of the 12 years were great. It just was a really good fit. I
Mhm.
had four different jobs in the time I was there. I was, getting interesting new challenges. But the last job that I was in, um, I didn't apply for it. It was it was one of these deals where your boss tells you that, okay, I want you in this role, and I was like, I don't really want that role. She's like, I really want you in this role. So I'm a good corporate citizen, and I took it, and it just never really was a great fit. And so
Right.
in the time that I was in it, it just got me thinking, like, what do I want to do next? And as I looked around the company, after being there for 12 years, I
Right.
just didn't see anything that looked like you know, an opportunity that I was interested in. So that got me thinking, like, okay, well, I did interview at other companies, but I also said to myself, what am I good at and what do I like to do?
Mm.
And, I was a marketing leader, and I even thought about, like, okay, my interactions within the company, what is it about them that I like? And what I really liked was, sitting across the table from a business leader, understanding their problems,
Right.
kind of co-creating a solution and then working with them to make that solution a reality, which bottom line, that's kind of the that's kind of the definition of coaching. And so when I realized that that was sort of what was at the heart of my true satisfaction, with my career, I decided to leave my company and enroll in a coach training program. And it took about 8 months for me to finish that up. And
Mhm.
and I will tell you that initially, I kind of took a sabbatical to do that. Initially, I didn't think that I would become a full-time coach. I just thought that would be sort of like my
Something you
side
did.
hustle.
Sure. Sure.
Um, but in the time that I was in the program, my views on it evolved. And I finally got to a point and I was like, well, I'm already out here and I'm already coaching. Why don't I just try to make it into a business?
Right.
And so I did. And so that's what I've been doing since 2017.
Oh my goodness, that's great. That's great. I want to go back. You said you got yourself a coach. What were you expecting, or what were you? Because coaching wasn't. And this is a few years ago now. Since you
Yes, it
did that,
was.
that
Yeah.
wasn't like. I think it's more prevalent now, and it's more common. And I think
Yeah.
every other person has a coach. But back then, that would have been
Right.
very
No,
new.
it's funny because I'll tell this story. I mean, it's a little really, my feeling of humiliation is what drove me to find a coach. And I've told this story a number of times, but I remember the first time I told it, I felt so vulnerable
Right.
sharing this. But
Yeah. Okay.
I mentioned the mentor that I had. He was the head of marketing for one of the businesses at this company I worked for,
Uh huh.
and he'd been I'd been very, very involved in development of strategy. I was kind of his right hand person. And a lot of the things that we worked on were really things that I drove, but he was sort of the face of the department. And um, he left the company. And it occurred to me, hey, I've been here at his right hand all this time. I think I'm ready for this. And so I applied to be the replacement for him. And quite frankly, in the months after he left, before they even started the search process, I kind of informally stepped up to, lead the department because there was just a vacuum there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been at the company for about 9 years or so. And I thought, hey, people know the work I've been doing, and I
Right.
just assumed people knew that I was a quality worker and, that I
Mm-hmm.
was ready for this and all that. The first interview I did well, I advanced to the next round, but I made a kind of a stupid assumption. The second round of interviews was a panel interview with marketers in another city that
Okay.
our company was in. And so I had to travel there, And I just didn't do a lot of preparation because I was like, oh, people know me. Like I knew these people. I didn't know them super
Mm,
well, but I knew them. I'd been in meetings with them and stuff like that. And I just thought, hey, they know what I do. And I went in and I did not do well in the interview. And it
mm,
was, you know, I mean, part of it was nerves. Like the panel interview is not easy, you know, when you're
right,
sitting there and you've
right.
got six eyes staring
Yep,
at you
that's
across the
right.
table.
That's right.
But I didn't do well and I got eliminated from the process. And I was, you know, I felt embarrassed and I felt ashamed that, you know, I had kind of squandered this opportunity when I felt like I personally felt like I was the heir apparent for the role. And so I thought, well, you know, not going to, you know, I've lost that opportunity, but I don't want this to ever happen to me again. And so I did say to myself, like, oh, it's funny, like you were saying about the coaching, because I remember thinking, like, I think there's some person called like a career coach or something. Like I remember I wasn't that familiar, but I was like, I think that there are people that do this. And so I went, and this is like even before Google. So I went on Yahoo and I'm like,
Wow.
you know,
Wow.
typing in like career coach. And I found somebody in my community that did it. And I hired her and I worked with her for a few months. And she helped me, you know, probably the biggest mistake that I made in applying for that job is that I had not mentally promoted myself
Oh.
to leader, right? I
Mm,
was not viewing myself as the leader of the department. I was you know, I was just like, hey, here I am, you know.
that's right. Like
And
some
you know, my
assumptions. Like I
yeah,
can. Yeah,
yeah.
right. Right. Right.
I wasn't aware of how I needed to show up to earn
Gotcha.
people's trust and
Gotcha.
credibility that I could do this job.
Yes.
And so she helped me with that. She, you know, helped me to develop a strategy for interviewing so that I was really, you know, presenting myself in the way that I needed to be seen as a leader. I did a bit of a, you know, corporate makeover to myself. I got a haircut and bought some new clothes, you know, just so I
Yep.
was
Yep.
showing up as like somebody
Yep.
that looked like they belonged at that level.
Yep. Yep.
And the interesting thing about this situation is that, you know, it took, I don't know, a few months, I guess, and they got to the end of the interviewing process for that role, and they offered the job to someone who turned it down. And
Mm,
they did not have kind of a secondary candidate that they wanted to hire, and so they started the process all over again. And I thought, well, what the heck, you know, I've been
right.
trained in how to do this better. So
Right.
I applied, and I wasn't even sure if they would interview me again, but they did. And this time, with my newfound confidence and the skills that I had, I advanced to the finals. I was the only internal candidate, and they had one external candidate. And and actually, it's so funny because my final round of interviews was another panel interview, but this time it was with the CEO of the division and
Okay.
his two top executives.
Okay.
I can remember it so clearly, sitting in the, you know, really fancy conference room off of his office. I felt really confident. But unfortunately, they offered the job to the external candidate and he took it. And of course, I was disappointed. I was proud of
Yeah.
myself because I felt like I played to win this time.
Yeah.
And, you know, they just decided they wanted some new blood, right? And, um, but the interesting thing is the day that I found out that the other person accepted the job,
Hmm.
I got a call from a recruiter. And this started a few month flurry of activity. Just weirdly, I think that when we prepare ourselves, a lot of times the opportunities come our way,
Right.
because by the end of probably 3 to 4 months, I had two job offers and I
Amazing.
was actively interviewing for a third role. And I ended up taking one of the jobs that brought me here to Chicago. I was in North Carolina then, and it brought me here to Chicago to head up marketing for a division of
Right.
a bank here in Chicago. And the interesting thing is that even though it was a bit of a brutal journey, the
Yes.
job that I got was better than the job I didn't get at my old employer. And it was really nice to be able to walk in the door and from day one be perceived as a leader rather than, you know, maybe fighting people's old perceptions of who I was at my old company. Because, you know,
Yep.
I'd come in as a freshly minted MBA and kind of
Yep.
worked my way up.
Yep.
And I'm sure some people just were like, oh, she's just that young, you know, young woman that works in marketing. But I
Right.
was able to walk into this and they were like, hey, here's our new director of marketing. So
And that's so
anyway,
important.
that's,
No, that's
yeah,
that's a really important point, Terry. That how you're viewed, and obviously we can't control how people view us, but there's things
right.
that we can do to help set the stage, so to speak, and having that confidence and ability to stand and say, hey.
Yes.
I know who I am. I know what I bring to the table, and I'm here to do that job. And so the confidence thing, I definitely was something I wanted to touch on with you because
Hmm.
I think that not necessarily the starting point, but certainly a key point in having any kind of success at work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I think that I came across this quote when I was going through, when I was working with the coach, and that was, this quote is, confidence is the expectation of a positive outcome. And when I, got the job here in Chicago, I actually had that on a post-it note, which was tacked up at my desk, that it was just in front of me every day because it was a pretty, somewhat high stakes
Sure.
move for me. It was a big promotion. I got a big raise. And I'm married, and at the time, I mean, I had three young children that
Yep.
were, I think,
Yep.
like 6, and 2. And we moved here
Very
to
young.
Chicago, and my husband and I decided that he would actually stay home. He had worked, we both worked when we were in North Carolina, and we decided that it just made sense for him to stay home because I had a long commute, and, we
Right.
didn't want the kids to be like in a daycare, like hours
Right.
away.
Right.
And so he stayed home, but obviously I needed to make this work, right? Like I could not, come here and wash out.
Hmm.
And so I just had to remind myself every day that, I mean, I needed to show up like a leader. And so I had to expect that whatever came my way, I was going to have to handle. Right. And I think that that's how you show up as confident, is you go into it with a positive attitude, thinking no matter what gets thrown at me, there's going to be a positive outcome. I'm going to make that happen. And
Hmm.
it worked. I was at that company for 12 years. And I had, numerous opportunities there to grow and, just really do some
Yep.
very cool stuff.
Hmm.
So it was a very good move from a career standpoint for me.
Yeah. How important is it to is that we keep track of our milestones or past achievements
Yeah.
again from a confidence standpoint? We could talk about that because I know for myself, I oftentimes that becomes that measure. If you run into something like, yeah, I did this before, I can do it again. That kind of
Hmm.
those self talk things we do with
Yes.
ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important, and it's funny because in the role that I was in marketing, I was part of a larger marketing department, and my boss every year at the end of the year, he would actually have us put together what we called a brag book,
Okay.
to look back over the whole course of the year of what our whole department did. And he actually would get it printed and distribute it to all of the leaders of our
Amazing.
business, to remind them like we are adding value. And one of the things that's very interesting about working in marketing is that we're always doing new and different things. I mean, in the role I was in, we were doing events, we were doing, we did rebranding. We did a rebranding in the time that I was there. We were doing, lots of print advertising and email campaigns, and, just the whole gamut of things. And it can be so easy to be like, okay, we finished that, on to next, on to next, on to
Right.
next. That's like, you're always like looking into the future. What's the
Yep.
next deadline?
Yep.
And very rarely looking, over your shoulder to see how far you've come or what amazing things you've done. And I got in the habit of just, having sort of like a brag sheet that I would just, when we started a project, I would put it on there. And like when it was done and we had some results, I'd put that in there so that at the end of the year, I would have things to give to my boss to be like, oh, here's all the incredible things we did this year. Um, and I think it's important. It's funny because I actually use that technique with my coaching clients sometimes
Hmm.
whenever they, maybe they're in a tough situation at work, things are hard, maybe they don't like their boss, maybe it's
Yep.
not a good fit, whatever. And a
Yep.
lot of times people can start to doubt themselves and start to think, oh, maybe I'm just not cut out for this, or maybe I'm not valuable. And sometimes I just have to remind them, like, okay, you just, you have an undergrad and a graduate degree from two top-notch universities. You've done this professional thing
Yeah,
and this
yeah,
professional
yeah.
thing. And, just remind people that if you've done this before, you can do it again,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And, sometimes, yes, of course, we deal with things that are very difficult, and I think sometimes it's important to stop and feel the feelings around that, but process it, get it out of the way, don't wallow in it, and get back to the bedrock of what you're really capable of. Like, we're all
Yes.
made of like way stronger stuff than sometimes we
Yes.
give ourselves credit for.
Yes, 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 we certainly are. I remember I used to have my resume. I used to accompany a third page, and I called it accomplishments, and I just
Yeah.
listed just stuff that weren't and the stuff listed weren't even necessarily related to a job I was applying for, but it
Hmm.
was just I thought it was a way of helping sort of round me out, and at the same time
Sure.
also kind of reminding me how great I am too, and so I thought that was a
Right.
helpful tools, and so it's a
Yeah.
good point you raised. I like that. Um, the world of work now. We all know how the uncertainty that exists, and
Yes.
and I think the need to be able to take control, if you will, is probably more important now than ever before. There's so much going on that's outside of our control.
Yeah.
We don't know where things will be 6 months, a year from now, or the long term
Hmm.
effects of kind of what we're
Sure.
dealing with. I guess that the need for a service like yours within that context is even greater now because people really should be taking control more than ever before.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because in 2020, I was super busy. um, and sometimes I've been doing podcasts for a couple years now,
Yep.
as a guest, and a lot of times people will ask me like, "Oh, how's your 2020 been?" And it's surprisingly busy because people, I mean, for one thing, a lot of people were laid off, especially at the beginning of the pandemic and the
Yep.
lockdown. But also people experiencing work from a very different perspective.
Yes.
One of the things that I saw with a lot of people was that, maybe it had been a while since they'd been satisfied with work, but they never really had the time to contemplate what might be next, right? Because they were busy commuting an hour each way and just caught up in the routine. And, when their commute changed to, putting on a nice shirt and wearing sweatpants and getting on Zoom, uh, they
Right.
had a little more time and a different perspective to consider, like, okay, is it time for me to do something different? And if so, what
Right.
might that be? Um, I think that the benefit of coaching, and I mean, this is both from my own personal use of coaches, but also as a coach, is that sometimes people are so close to their situation that they can't see it in a larger context.
Yes.
I
Absolutely.
encourage people very often, like, they're so close,
Yeah.
and if they're running, and I work with high achievers, right? So high achievers' first instinct usually is to double down on whatever they've been doing, right? If they've been successful by working hard, they're going to work harder. If
Harder. Yep.
they've,
Yep.
been successful by taking on projects, they're going to take on more projects. And a lot of time that just exacerbates the problem that they're dealing with. If it's burnout, if it's, frustration or dissatisfaction, that just makes it worse. And so, I try to encourage people to sort of zoom out and see. I mean, part of the reason why I called my book Winning the Game of Work is because I do believe that if we can treat work like a game, that
Mm.
we actually remove ourselves somewhat from it. It's a little less
Yep.
personal
That's
so
right.
that we can develop some effective strategies for what we do, right? And it's not personal. And that's one of the things too, that a lot of times, people do take the things that happen at work very personally, and of
Yes.
course it feels personal because it's you.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if you don't get the promotion, or if you get, I mean, I've done outplacement coaching also, where people, I might be the first person that they talk to after they've talked to HR and gotten
Right.
laid off,
Right.
right?
Right.
And they'll
Right.
say, "Oh, I was there for 20 years and I can't believe that, they treated me this way." And, I just try to help people understand that, this was a business decision and it really wasn't about your worth or your
Correct.
contributions. It was really more about, maybe they had to cut expenses in order to keep the business afloat,
That's right.
or that Wall Street expected, that they had to cut expenses by a certain amount. And unfortunately, they were, a victim of that. But we can process the emotions around it. And then, like I was saying earlier, get back to the bedrock of like, how do you add value? And what can we do to start thinking about like where in the marketplace do you want to trade your skills and your strengths to add value so you can get paid?
Right, right, and that's yeah. I mean, obviously that's a goal, but it's a very good exercise to kind of go through when you sort of mentally think about the where part, right? As opposed to I got to get a job, right? To sit
Yes,
when you can be
absolutely.
when you can very deliberate and go, okay, so what makes sense for me? I think we've all sort of been in the situations where we're thinking, well, this situation isn't ideal for me, but this one may be. And I
Hmm.
think when you can take that time and be very deliberate about that process, that
Yes.
bodes well for you in the end, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that I always want my clients and anybody actually to take into consideration if they're considering leaving their current job is to make sure that you are moving towards something and not running away from something,
Mm,
because it's a very common for somebody to be in a job and it's uncomfortable, they don't like their boss, they don't like some of the work that they're doing,
yep.
and because it's so uncomfortable they just want to get out of it, right? As soon they
Yes.
want to get out of it as soon as possible. And a lot of times, they're running away from that job. So they jump out of the frying pan into
Right.
the fire. And they can actually go into a much worse situation than the one they're in. And so I think it's really important,
Well,
even if you're,
that's a taking control thing we talked about earlier, right?
yes,
It's taking
yeah,
control.
right, right, exactly. And, if you've got a job, even if it's uncomfortable, at least you've got a job, you've got a paycheck. If you make that intentional, conscious decision that I want to do something different, spend the time to think about, okay, what is it about this job that I don't like, right? And a lot of times when I'm working with people in the beginning, they'll come and they'll say, "Oh, these are all the things I don't like about my job." And we spend some time like processing and venting and all of that.
Yep. Yep.
But at some point, we've got to flip the table so that it's not about what they don't want, it's
What they
about what they do want. Like, let's get clear on, what does this situation look like that you would be really happy in? Right. That's the first step. And unfortunately, sometimes, people will really limit themselves because I see it so often where they'll say, well, I know exactly what I want. This is what it is. And they can describe it in a lot of detail. And they will immediately throw a wet blanket on it and say, well,
Yep.
here's all the reasons why I can't have that. I don't have an MBA. They don't
Right.
hire people over
Right.
40,
Yep. 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 Yep.
etc. Right.
Yep.
And I'm like, no, 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 no. Stop right there.
Yep.
Right. Let your dream live. Do not smother it. You just brought it forth into the world. Let it live, let it breathe. Separately, let's just say, what are some potential avenues of how we could get from where you are to that,
Mm,
right? And let's start walking down that path. Let's put a roadmap together of what would have to happen, and let's start walking down that path.
nice.
And the thing that's super interesting is that I've worked with people that, sometimes their aspirations, I'm like, hey, I'll be your partner in helping you make this happen. I mean, it's not about me and whether I believe it can happen. Like, I believe if somebody wants it, they
Yep.
can make it happen.
Right.
But sometimes I've thought, this might be a long road, right? But
Mhm.
I've seen people get the thing they want so fast once they believe it's possible and they start taking action.
Yes.
Because the interesting thing is that we're surrounded by people who have the answers to the questions that we have, that
Mm,
that have the solutions to the problems that we have. But a lot of times we don't ever let anybody know what it is that we want. We don't get to know people. We don't ask them questions like, hey, who do you know? Or, hey, I noticed that, you do this. I'd like to learn more about that. I've had clients that, you know, had a coffee with somebody and walked out of the coffee with a job offer, or somebody who
Amazing.
finally figured out what she wanted to do, and as soon as she did, she goes on LinkedIn, sees a company that has that job offer, or has that job opening, realizes that somebody she used to work with works there, calls that person, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, send your resume." I
Nice.
mean, this client, she got a job offer like 3 weeks after she saw the job opening. It
Wow.
just, and she was
Well,
somebody that, oh my gosh, she had had a lot of like super traumatic things happen in her life. And she was really, you know, uh, had a lot of pain, right? And really
sure.
had a lot of fear
Mhm.
about making changes. But when we finally got her over that hump to like start taking some action, it happened so quickly.
It
It was
does. It
amazing.
does. It
It's
is too.
amazing.
It is fascinating how quickly when the action when you put your mind to it, it almost happens almost immediately, and you're going, why didn't I take action before? Right?
Yeah,
Almost.
well, it's always we're all, afraid of rejection
Sure.
and,
Sure.
looking silly and all of that kind of stuff. But,
I get it. I get it.
if you don't take action, nothing's going to happen.
I get it. I get it. You referenced your books. Let's touch on that. Winning the Game of Work, happiness and success on your terms. I think
Yes.
I really really love that part on your terms, right? What that clearly
Yes.
says is that you're in control here. Again, going back to that, taking control of your professional career, but you doing what you want for yourself when you want. All those things are so key and
Yeah.
important. I think you should talk about the book.
Yeah, well, it's funny because the book really started off when I first left my last corporate position. I
Hmm.
just had a lot of stuff to process, right? It's a huge transition to say I've been doing this for 30 years and
Mm.
I am going to stop doing it, at least for a while, right? I needed time to sort of sort out what I wanted to do.
Yep.
And when I left the job, I just had a lot of thoughts. And it's funny because I would wake up in the morning and grab my phone and a lot of times just like type out like 500 words on my phone and it became a blog. So I was blogging for a couple years
Yep.
about just the lessons that I learned and things that I wanted to share with other people that took me a lot of time and effort and pain to learn myself. I don't want other people to have to go through so
Right.
much pain.
Right.
And so I did that for a couple of years, and then I finally somebody said something to me like, "How many words do you have in your blog, like total?" And I downloaded everything, and I had like 25,000 words, and he was like,
Wow.
"You have enough for a book." So I joined a book writing program. I wrote some more, and I interviewed some
Sure.
super interesting people for my book as well.
Yep.
But it really was born out of this idea that I didn't know that I should be looking at work as a game, and I didn't know that there were unwritten rules. I had to stumble and fall on my face and be frustrated for a long time before I started figuring this out.
Yep.
And so I wanted to share my own lessons with other people so that they didn't have, because I mean, I see it in my coaching business all the time where they're really hardworking, super smart people
Right.
who are frustrated because they're like, why is this thing that I want not happening? I am working so
Right.
hard.
Right. Right.
And a
Right.
lot of times I'm like, it's not about how hard you work. It's about understanding what's going on around you and
Mhm.
being more intentional about some of the moves that you make, right? It's
Yep.
I in my book I talk about a lot of people approach the game of work like they're playing Twister and other people are playing Monopoly. And they're wondering, like, why am I not having success? And it's like, because you don't know the rules of the game,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Let
That's
me
right.
share the rules of the game.
Hmm.
It might
Hmm.
feel weird. Sometimes people are really skeptical,
Yep.
when I'm working with them and they'll say, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And I'll say, well, let's practice it. And then you go and, you try it at work and see what happens. And so often they'll come back and they'll be like, oh my God, I was really scared to do that. But when I did it, it worked exactly the way that you said it would. And they
Nice.
feel so empowered, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
they've been
Absolutely.
banging their head against the wall and then they do this thing that might feel counterintuitive, but it works in a way that they never imagined.
Oh, that's amazing. And I guess that from from the coaching perspective, to watch clients walk away with those learnings, understandings, it's got to be a thrill for you, I imagine.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, it's what I'm all about. I mean, I don't want people to be unhappy, and I don't want
Sure.
them to work hard and, kind of figuratively hit their head against the brick wall. Like it's pointless.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to feel needed and
Right.
valued, and they want to, set their sights on goals and achieve them, right? And
Right.
I want to
Right.
help people do that without, grinding it out, like help them be more in the flow
Yes.
so that they've got energy to, you know, take care of themselves, to hang out with
Yep.
their family, to do their
Yep.
hobbies, to do the things that are fun for them, so that when Monday rolls around, they're like, "Hey, I've got plenty of energy to get up and go to work and do stuff and, innovate and come up with great new ideas." So that they really not only love their life, but they love their work too.
Got you. Got you. What's an ideal client look like to you?
It's typically somebody who is an overachiever. I was talking earlier about the people that, when they run into an obstacle, they double down on what's worked up until this point. And, you know, they're very capable, successful people, but
Yes.
I talk about people that are successful but not satisfied. Like that's
Hmm.
kind of my ideal client. And what I mean by that is that if you look at them from the outside, they've gotten to a certain level of success. You're like, hey, you work at this great company, you got this VP title, or you're
Yep.
heading a department or something like that, or you're rising. But when they talk to me, they're like, oh, I'm so burnt out, and I maybe they're losing confidence or whatever, and they're paying a high price for that success.
Yes.
That stress, that anxiety, that worry, that maybe time, like
Well,
working too hard.
some would argue that that's not even success, right? It might appear.
I completely agree, and
Yeah.
that's kind of my point. Like, I do not believe that it truly is success. It's sort of
Yeah.
success on paper. It's
Right.
society's idea of
Right.
success.
Right.
But to me, if you don't have the time and the energy to enjoy, what you've worked for, that's not really success. That's like being a drone. It's
Yes.
grinding.
Yes.
Uh, that's not what life is about, right? Like, we should be working to live, not living to
The
work.
work, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's why, again, when you sort of look at your visit your website, your book, and your messaging, it is very much around finding that happiness, right?
Yeah.
The happiness very much works hand in hand and coincides with success. And
Yeah.
if you've attained this high position at a cost, and you're not happy, then as we
hmm
both landed on, you haven't been successful.
No, no, it's not. And I truly believe that, with some small, like, shifting of the mindset to
Yep.
believe that it's possible, and learning some new skills, that you can easily, like, move maybe just a few degrees from where you
Sure.
are, and you're not hitting your head against the wall anymore. You
Right.
discover a way to get past these obstacles that have kept you stuck, and you're just a lot more in the flow. You can be more yourself. And I think it's funny, because a lot of times when I'm working with people, they don't fully appreciate their own superpowers.
Hmm.
They'll say to themselves, like, oh, that's just easy for me to,
Yeah.
connect with people, or it's easy
Yeah.
for me to, look at a spreadsheet and kind of pull the,
Yeah.
you know, data out. And
Yep.
people don't appreciate the things that are special about
That's
themselves.
right.
And, I try to help people to recognize that
Well, they don't think it's special. They think it's normal.
they,
It's just
and,
what I do.
and, honestly, the things that come easy to you are your superpower,
Yeah.
right? And you don't
Yeah.
have to, like, go and do the super hard thing. You can just,
Yes.
like, lean into the thing that comes naturally to you, right?
Yes.
And that's where you're going to find that there's a lot more energy. But, we've got to get over some of our own preconceived notions that work has to be hard.
Yes. Yes.
You can
Learn that
actually
strategy.
have more impact by working less, and you can also have these, like, giant leaps by you know allowing yourself to kind of go into an area where you can imagine, because sometimes we think, like, oh, the progress at work has to be like we're going to fight for every inch, right? And sometimes it's like some, brilliant idea that comes to you that's a leap forward. And maybe you're thinking about something in a different way, and you don't have to fight for every inch. You might, take a giant leap and you're going to get to someplace new and approach things from a different angle. But we have to give ourselves the space to tap into that part of ourselves that, where there is that inner wisdom and imagination and vision. But so often we sort of put that on the back burner. We say that's
Yes.
not important, and in
Yes.
fact, it is. That's
Very
that's a
important.
higher level living and higher level, value develop or production. I guess I don't know.
No, makes total sense, and again, I love the messaging, particularly around success and what that what it truly is. So I thank you for that, Terry. Thank you for being here. It's so awesome chatting with you, and I think the insights are fabulous, and the work that you're doing, particularly around and the piece that again that stands out to me is sort of taking control on your terms. Right, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be what is done to you; is what you can do. And I think that's all sort of I think it's a fabulous mindset to be in and space to operate from within
Oh,
because
yeah.
things don't happen to you; you control them, right? And that's a great place to be.
Well, it's funny. I think that so we've all been sort of, or many of us have been programmed to think of like, okay, you know, a job is a box that we have to like sort of contort ourselves to fit
Right,
into, right? And
right,
we kind of squish ourselves into it. And it doesn't feel fulfilling because it's not taking into consideration like who we are as a whole person.
correct.
And, a lot of times when I'm working with people that are in job search, I'm like, go out and network because a lot of times you can find people or organizations who maybe haven't fully fleshed out, the problem that they're facing, and they can sometimes build a job around you so that
Yes.
you can show up and be 100% who you are, not,
Yep.
70% who you are, and you have to, sublimate part of the parts of yourself that don't fit into that
Right.
box.
Right. Right.
And there's a lot of different ways to make a living too. It doesn't always have to be about a job, right? You can start your own business, or you can
Yeah.
be a consultant, or and those are all legitimate ways of making a living.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a big part of it is sort of breaking down these preconditioned notions of things that
Hmm.
you tell ourselves, I can't, or I don't know how, or whatever,
Yeah,
whatever the
limiting beliefs. Yeah.
exactly whatever those limiting beliefs are. So again, I think it's great work that you're doing. For our listeners that want to learn more about you, or connect with you, or even get a copy of your book, where can we send them?
Well, they can go to my website, terrybmcdougall.com. Check me out there. And if you want to set up some time to have a free exploratory call, you can. My calendar link is there. If you're interested in the book, Winning the Game of Work, it is available on Amazon worldwide, both as an ebook and a paperback. I actually am next week. I'm launching a subscriber community
Okay.
for various things, premium newsletter, a book club, some other things. And you can find that at subkit.com/ Coach Terry,
Okay.
Terry. And then I guess the last thing, and we didn't talk about this, but I also have a podcast. I
Yes,
was
that's
a
right.
marketer for so many years, and I still have such a passion. I work with a lot of marketers from a coaching
Yep.
standpoint, but I still have a passion for the field of marketing. And so I have a podcast called Marketing Mambo, and it's on all of the platforms. You can also find it at marketingmambo.net, where I speak with people in and around the whole world of marketing, just about their careers and their perspectives on the field of marketing.
I'm so glad you raised that. I mean, first off, I mean, as a podcaster, I have an affinity to it, if you will, and so I think it's a fabulous medium for whatever your message may be. And although this isn't a coaching podcast that you do, a career coaching, I mean, at the same time, there's some overlaps between marketing and the world that you also spend a lot of time in.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
congratulations and fabulous stuff, and thanks for being here, Terry. It's been great.
Audley, thank you so much for having me. I just really loved our conversation. I think that we're, kindred spirits in many ways.
Yes, it was fabulous to have you. All the best and take care.
Thanks.
Back we are here on the podcast, and much thanks goes out to Terry for joining me and offering a bit of enlightenment when it comes to landing on that career that will provide us with happiness and satisfaction. And it's really something that we all desire. It's available to us, and it's just a matter of being clear on what we want, having some sort of solid plan in place to get it, and then actually executing that plan. You know, Terry left us with so much to think about, but if there's just one thing that I take from my conversation with her, it would be this. There's a pervasive belief in the professional world that says work has to be hard, and if there's any chance of reaching the top and finding any form of success, one would have to put in long hours, make personal sacrifices, and keep grinding until you get there. You know, the general thinking is once you've done these things, success at work will eventually come. But this isn't necessarily the case, and I think we know this. And there's two reasons that I want to point out why it's not the case. First off, doing these things won't guarantee that you'll get the level of success that you're looking for. And secondly, if you don't have the time and energy to enjoy the things that you've worked so hard for, then the question is, have you truly experienced success? You know, by definition, grinding involves, a great deal of friction and tension and force that can expend vast amounts of energy. And not having the energy robs us of enjoying a wonderful life and all the parts that make it unique. Now, to be clear, the message isn't don't work hard, but rather, if the work hard isn't getting you on that path of living the bold, audacious life, then it's time to reevaluate why you're doing it. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so simply by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com and enter your email address, and you'll be immediately subscribed to all content that comes out and that comes your way. We've reached the end of another episode, and again, big shout out and thanks to Terry. Appreciate you being here. Also have to thank our audacious listeners. Without you, this wouldn't be possible, and your support and encouragement is very, very much appreciated. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.